The first thing my sister broke was the little cedar box with the blue ribbon around it. She lifted it off the gift table, smiled like she was about to tell a joke, and dropped it hard onto the flagstone patio until the lid cracked clean down the middle. Then she took her heel to the rest of my son's birthday presents one by one while half the family stood there with paper plates in their hands, and that ugly, embarrassed laughter people use when cruelty arrives wearing a smile. My son Ben did not shout. He just stared at the shattered wrapping paper and the splintered wood, and that silence of his was worse than any scream I've ever heard. I remember setting down my coffee so carefully you would have thought my hands were steady. They were not. I was 74 years old that summer, old enough to know that humiliation has a sound. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is the thin crack of something made with care breaking under the weight of somebody else's entitlement. Diane, my younger sister by 6 years, had always confused patience with weakness. A lot of them had. I was the brother who stayed. I was the son who handled repairs, hospital forms, roof leaks, tax notices, insurance calls, funeral arrangements, and the kind of long practical suffering families place on the shoulders of the one person they believe will never throw it back. I spent 42 years building custom cabinets and staircases with my own hands. I buried my wife, Elaine, 9 years earlier. I raised Ben mostly with those same hands after that. Ben had just turned 32. He was not a child, though Diane liked to speak about him that way when she wanted other people's permission to disrespect him. He was a quiet man, deliberate, precise, and gentler than most people know how to value. He repaired old radios, cataloged tools better than any hardware store manager I ever met, and remembered things the rest of us forgot. He did not like noise. He did not like being touched without warning. And he loved birthdays in the way some people love old songs, not for spectacle, but for the order of them. The same chocolate cake. The same glass candles. The same dinner on the back porch. The same careful opening of each gift because the thought mattered to him. That afternoon, I had given him 3 things. A set of hand-fitted carving chisels I'd spent 2 weeks restoring. A framed photograph of his mother holding him on her lap in my workshop, both of them laughing at sawdust in his hair. And the cedar box Diane broke first, which held my grandfather's pocket watch, cleaned, repaired, and ticking again after 20 years asleep in a drawer. She knew exactly what she was doing. "Oh, Harold, don't look at me like that," she said as the laughter thinned and died. "He's 32. You treat him like he's 8. It's ridiculous." Ben bent to pick up a piece of the cedar lid. Diane nudged another package toward the edge of the table with 2 fingers and let it fall. My nephew Scott chuckled under his breath. My cousin Marlene looked at her sandals. My father, Walter, sat in the shade at the far end of the porch with his blanket over his knees, his face unreadable. I said, "Get off my property." Diane looked around as if she couldn't believe I had spoken in full sentences. That was the thing about family. They build a version of you that serves them, and when you step outside it, they act startled. "You're overreacting," she said. "Everybody's tired of this performance. All this fuss over that house, over Ben, over Dad's money, like the whole world belongs to you." There it was. Not the gifts. Not the insult. The house. Everything ugly in my family eventually found its way back to land. But once Elaine was gone and my hair turned white, Diane began telling people I had talked Dad into it while he was grieving. Then she sharpened the story. Harold forgets things. Harold gets confused. Harold keeps Ben tucked away here because he knows that boy could never manage property. Harold is probably changing papers again. She told those things so often that people began repeating them with the comfortable laziness of borrowed opinion. What made it dangerous was that Diane had positioned herself where lies become leverage. After our father's mild stroke 2 years earlier, she took over his appointments, his medications, and eventually his mail. She presented it as devotion. "I'm just helping," she would say. She had always preferred theft in the clothing of concern. At first, I let it go. I was tired. I had my son, my shop, and the quiet routines of an old man who had learned to live around grief. But then small things began to shift. Dad's bank statements stopped arriving at the house. The annual lease check from the cell tower on the back parcel was deposited, but somehow the balance kept running low. A property tax notice arrived already opened. And one afternoon, while fixing a warped gate by the pasture, I heard Scott telling a neighbor, "Doesn't matter how much Uncle Harold stomps around. Aunt Diane says the farm comes back into the estate once Grandpa passes. Ben won't get a thing." That was the day I stopped mistaking malice for family tension. I drove into town and met with Nora Ellison, an attorney whose father I had built kitchen cabinets for 30 years earlier. She remembered me. More importantly, she listened without interrupting. She asked for dates, copies, names, and account numbers. She didn't offer comfort. I respected her for that. "Bring me the deed," she said. "Bring me anything with signatures. And Harold, do not warn your sister." So I went home and opened every drawer, every file cabinet, every old metal box I had ignored, because the past can feel heavy in your hands when you're living alone with it. In the back of the workshop office, behind a stack of invoices from 2004, I found my mother's fireproof document case. The combination was still my birthday. Inside were the recorded deed, the loan paperwork from when I had cleared the tax lien, and a sealed envelope in my father's uneven block handwriting. If Harold is the one caring for this place, it stays with Harold. No arguments after I'm gone. Ben is his son and belongs under this roof as much as any Mercer ever did. There was also a second folder I had never seen before. It held copies of my father's trust amendment from 18 months earlier, notarized by a woman at the credit union. The amendment did two things that made my heart slow down and my blood go cold at the same time. It funded a special support trust for Ben using the cell tower lease and a brokerage account I did not know still existed. And it included a no-contest clause. Any child of Walter Mercer who challenged the trust or interfered with the transfer of the farmhouse would forfeit all remaining inheritance. Someone had known those papers existed. Someone had wanted them buried. Nora moved quickly after that. She obtained bank records through my father's authorization, an authorization Diane clearly thought she controlled. The records showed a string of transfers over 14 months, neat amounts just under the threshold that might draw a bank's attention. $3,000 here, $4,800 there, $9,000 labeled care reimbursement. A total of $86,000 had moved from Dad's accounts into one belonging to Diane and, twice, into Scott's landscaping business. When Nora laid the printouts side by side, I felt no rage at first. Only recognition. That was the ugly part. Somewhere inside me, I had already known what kind of people they had become. The pressure escalated once Diane realized I was no longer playing the old role. She began arriving without notice. She brought forms clipped to manila folders and spoke in the bright, hard voice women use when they are performing reasonableness for an audience. "It's just practical," she told me one morning at my kitchen table. "Dad needs consistency, and if something happens to you, the house will be tied up. Sign a transfer on death adjustment so I can manage things for Ben." For Ben, I repeated. Yes, obviously. Ben was in the pantry lining canned goods into rows because order calmed him. He heard every word. I slid the papers back across the table without reading them. "Get out." Then Scott tried his own method. He filed a complaint with County Code Enforcement about unsafe workshop conditions. A week later, someone from Adult Protective Services appeared after an anonymous report claimed I was financially exploiting my father and neglecting my son. I cooperated. I walked the caseworker through the house, showed her Ben's room, our meal plans, the medication logs for my father's visits, the workshop permits, the tax receipts, the maintenance records. Ben, in his careful way, showed her the shelves he had organized and the notebook where he tracked every grocery purchase to the penny. By the time she left, her face had changed. 2 days later, she called and said quietly, "Mr. Mercer, whoever reported you is not concerned for your family." "No," I said. "They were concerned for my property." The hardest part of that season was not the paperwork. It was what it did to Ben. He started moving through the house like he was apologizing for taking up space. The broken photograph frame from his birthday stayed on the dining room sideboard for weeks because he could not bring himself to throw it away and could not bear to look at it long enough to fix it. One night I found him in the workshop holding the smashed cedar box in both hands. She knew about the watch, he said. Yes. Why would she do that in front of Grandpa? I looked toward the dark window where my own reflection had begun to resemble my father's. Because cruel people like witnesses. It makes them feel correct. He nodded once, the way he did when a truth hurt but fit. A week later, Diane overplayed her hand. She brought a mobile notary to my father's assisted living apartment without telling me and tried to have him sign a new power of attorney after his medication rounds. If she had succeeded, she might have bought herself months. Maybe more. But she forgot one thing: old men who built houses notice details. My father had once taught me that a man's mind could be measured by what he caught when other people thought he was fading. He proved it that afternoon. He refused to sign, asked the nurse for his glasses, and told the notary to leave. Then he called me himself, voice rough but steady, and said, "Your sister thinks sedation is the same as permission." It was the first honest sentence he had spoken to me in months without Diane hovering nearby. Nora arranged an independent geriatric evaluation the next morning. My father passed it cleanly. Competent. Oriented. Capable of revoking prior authority. That should have ended it. It did not. People who build their lives around anticipated theft do not stop because the door locks. They simply try a window. So I invited them all to supper. I told Diane I thought we should clear the air before Dad's 95th birthday in the fall. I said Nora would attend to help us sort out the papers. I told Scott and the cousins to come too, since family had become so interested in family business. Diane agreed too quickly. She believed I was finally surrendering to age, to fatigue, to that old habit of mine, absorbing damage so other people could keep their version of peace. On Sunday evening, the dining room table was set with my wife's old white plates. Ben had polished the silver until it shone. The repaired cedar box sat closed in the center like a private marker. Through the window, the sycamore leaves barely moved. I remember that because before a storm, stillness can feel almost ceremonial. They arrived in stages. Diane in a cream blouse that looked expensive enough to count as evidence. Scott with the swagger of a man who mistakes his own appetite for intelligence. Two cousins who had laughed on the patio. My father came last, pushed in by Marlene, the nurse aide who had known him for a year and had grown tired of watching Diane translate his silences into consent. Nora stood when he entered. So did I. Ben moved his grandfather's side and adjusted the blanket over his knees without being asked. Diane smiled tightly. "Well, this is formal." "It is," Nora said. Nobody touched the food. Nora laid 3 folders on the table. In the first was the recorded deed transferring the farmhouse to me 21 years earlier, along with the ledger showing every tax payment, repair cost, and lien satisfaction I had made since then. In the second was my father's trust amendment funding Ben's support trust and protecting the house from challenge. In the third were the bank transfers. At first, nobody spoke. My father looked at her for a long time. Age had hollowed his cheeks, but not his gaze. "No," he said. "That was your specialty." The room went so quiet I could hear the old wall clock in the hallway. Nora slid the bank statements toward Scott. These transfers were made while Ms. Mercer represented herself as acting under your father's authority. That authority had already been revoked. The funds were diverted into her account and, on 2 occasions, yours. Diane turned on my father. "You told me I deserved compensation. I gave up my time. I took care of you. You took my checkbook," he said. "And you kept my son away from me because you thought sick meant stupid." I had not expected that sentence to hurt as much as it did. Marlene, the nurse aide, spoke then. Calmly. She described the attempted signing, the timing of the medications, Diane coaching my father to initial pages he had not read, the irritation on Diane's face when he asked for his glasses. Nora placed the geriatric evaluation on the table beside her statement. Diane looked around the room, searching for someone to rescue her with uncertainty. That is the last refuge of people like her, not innocence, but confusion. If they can make the truth feel messy, they think they can survive it. So I opened the cedar box. Inside, on the velvet lining I had replaced myself, lay my grandfather's watch, ticking softly. I fixed this for Ben, I said. The day you broke his gifts, you told everyone I treated him like a child. What you meant was that you needed everyone to believe he was less than a man, because if he was a man, then he was an heir. If he was a man, then this house had a future you could not control. Ben did not look at Diane. He looked at the watch. Nora folded her hands. A civil action has already been prepared. If restitution is not arranged immediately, there will be a criminal referral. In addition, any contest to Mr. Walter Mercer's trust will trigger the no contest clause. Ms. Mercer, you will lose the remainder of your inheritance if you continue. My father reached into the pocket of his cardigan and placed a small brass key on the table. Diane stared at it. That, he said, is the key to my lockbox at the credit union. I took your name off it 6 months ago. I took your authority. I took back every assumption you made when you decided my age belonged to you. For the first time in my life, my sister looked small. You're all unbelievable, she said. After everything I did for this family. I had waited years to answer that kind of sentence properly. No, I said. After everything this family did for you. Then I stood, opened the front door, and held it there. She left without another word. Scott followed her. The cousins slipped out behind them carrying their shame like coats they had not meant to wear home. That is the part people always want embellished when they hear some cleaned-up version of what happened later. They want thunder. They want somebody slapped with a lawsuit in real time. They want a perfect line delivered over the ruins. Life is quieter than that. Diane repaid part of the money through counsel before the rest was recovered through liens and forced sale of a rental property she had hidden behind an LLC. Scott settled separately and lost his business account in the process. The trust was secured, the deed reconfirmed, the records corrected everywhere they needed correcting. My father moved into the cottage behind the workshop by his own choice, where Ben brought him coffee every morning and read him the weather from the paper. As for the house, it remained what it had always been, not a prize, not leverage, not proof of one child's victory over another, but a place built and maintained by the people who actually kept faith with it. A month after that supper, I found Ben in the workshop polishing the hinges on the cedar box. He held out the repaired photograph frame to me. The glass was new. His mother's smile was still there. I fixed it, he said. I took it from him and nodded. At my age, gratitude can feel too large for speech. That night we put the photograph back on the sideboard. The watch went into the box. The box went on the shelf above my workbench where the late light touches it every evening around 6. They thought I was tired enough to surrender, old enough to be managed, lonely enough to be cornered, and wounded enough to mistake survival for peace. They were wrong. A man can be gentle without being weak. He can grieve and still keep records. He can love his family and still refuse to be devoured by them. And when the time comes, he can stand in his own doorway, hold it open, and let the wrong people walk out of his life while the right ones remain inside.